Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Shekalim. We're up to Perek Bet, Mishnah Dalet. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilui Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev, and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam Began Eden, Amen. In the previous Mishnah, we learned that Beit Hillel hold that in the case of Shekalim, where one saves up coins and says, let these be for my shekel obligation, any extra coins are unconsecrated, while if he says the same for a chatat offering that he owes, the extra coins are consecrated and go to buy communal offerings. Now our Mishnah explains the difference between the cases. Amar Rabbi Shimon, ma ben shkalim lechatat. Rabbi Shimon says, what is the difference according to Beit Hillel between shkalim, where the extra coins he set aside are not consecrated, and the chatat offering, where the extra coins are consecrated? Shekalim yesh lehem kitzba. The difference is that shekalim have a limit. A person may not contribute more than a shekel. Therefore, he certainly did not have in mind to consecrate more than a shekel's worth of coins when he started saving, and so the extra coins remain unconsecrated. The chatat en la kitzba, whereas a chatat offering has no limit. One may spend as much as he desires on the animal. Therefore, we say that he intended to consecrate all the money, and if there is any money left after he buys the animal, the extra goes for voluntary communal offerings. Now, Rabbi Yehuda questions this explanation. Rabbi Yehuda says, Af l'shkalim en lem kitzba. But even the shkalim obligation has no limit. Sheksha'alu Yisrael min hagola hayu shoklim dalkonot. For when Israel ascended to Eretz Yisrael from the Babylonian exile in the times of Ezra, they used Median coins called dalkonot as their basic unit of currency. The dalkon was a gold coin, the currency of the Persian Empire, which then controlled Eretz Yisrael. It equaled 2 slaim or 4 shkalim. Therefore, for their shekel contribution, they gave half of the standard coin, half a dalkon, which was equal to 1 selah. Now, when the Torah states that everyone must contribute a half shekel, it does not mean only a half shekel and no other coin. Rather, the mitzvah is to contribute half of the basic unit of currency in use at that time. At the time the Torah was given, the unit of currency was a shekel, so the amount each Jew had to contribute was half a shekel. But at different periods in history, the Jews gave half of whatever was then the basic unit of currency, even if it equaled more than the Torah's half shekel. As the Rav explains, as the Rambam writes in Ilchot Shekalim, chapter 1, halacha 5, Chazru lishkol slaim, the Mishnah continues later. After the collapse of the Persian Median Empire, they switched to using slaim, a selah equals 2 shekalim, as their unit of currency. Therefore, they changed their shekel contribution to half of the new standard coin, and they therefore gave a half selah, or 1 shekel each. Now, this restored the value of the payment to what had been in biblical times. The shekel of the Torah was equivalent to the selah of the Mishnah. The half shekel of the Torah was therefore equivalent to the full shekel of the Mishnah. Chazru lishkol tva'in ubikshu lishkol dinarim. Still, later they switched to using coins called tva'in as their unit of currency, and the people wished to contribute dinars, half tva'in, for the shekel obligation. However, the rabbis refused to accept a dinar for the shekel obligation because it was worth less than the half shekel of the Torah. The shekel of the Mishnah was worth 2 dinars. A dinar was therefore half the value of the Mishnah shekel, and therefore half the value of the Torah's half shekel. Even though it's permitted to contribute more than the value of the Torah's half shekel, provided it's half of the currency in use at that time, it's not permitted to give less than the value. To give less than that value. We learned this in the Pasuk in Sefer Shemot, chapter 30, Pasuk 13. Zeitenu. This they shall give. This, but not less than this. Now, at any rate, we see that the shekel obligation too has no set limit, and in various periods of history, the Jews gave more than the Torah's half shekel to fulfill their mitzvah. So how can Rabbi Shimon say that the shekel obligation has a set limit? Amar Rabbi Shimon defended himself. He said, Af al pi chen yad kulan sheveh. Even though it's true that the amount of the shekel obligation is not completely fixed, nevertheless, everyone's share is always equal. Because no matter what the currency is, no one is allowed to give more than half of it. As the Torah states in chapter 30, Pasuk 15 of Sefer Shemot, a rich man may not give more, and a poor man may not give less than a half shekel. Meaning, Even though the community can raise the amount of the contribution by increasing the basic unit of currency, the individual can never give more or less than what the community gives. Aval chatat, but regarding the chatat offering, that's not the case. Ze mevi b'sela, this person brings an animal worth a sela. Ze mevi b'shtayim, and this one brings an animal worth 2 slaim. V'ze mevi b'shalosh, and this one brings an animal worth 3 slaim. Since one may spend as much as he wants on his offering, we say that he intended to consecrate all the money he put aside, and the extra must therefore go toward purchasing communal offerings. And the Rav does tell us, V'achim maskinan, this is how we conclude, the Tamayu de Bet Hillel Rabbi Shimon. Bet Hillel's reasoning follows Rabbi Shimon. And that is in a Mishnah Daled. Mishnah he continues, now that we discussed in Mishnah 3 what is to be done with the extra shekel and chatat money, the Mishnah discusses now what is to be done with extra surplus of money collected for other purposes. The Mishnah introduces its list by repeating the law regarding shkalim. Motar shkalim chulin. The surplus of money set aside for the shekel obligation is unconsecrated. If someone put aside coins for a shekel obligation and finds that he mistakenly set aside more coins than necessary, the extra coins are unconsecrated, following Bet Hillel's opinion in Mishnah 3. The Mishnah continues its list. In all these cases, someone set aside money for a specific purpose, but finds that he has more money than he needs. Motar esrita efa. The surplus of money set aside for buying the 10th of an ephah of flour used as a chatat offering. Now this is an offering consisting of a 10th of an ephah of flour brought by someone who has committed particular sins and is too poor to afford animal or bird offerings for his chatat. Now the 10th of an ephah, also known as an isaron, has the volume of 43.2 average eggs. Mishnah continues, Motar kinei zavin, kinei zavod, v'kinei yoldot. The surplus of money set aside for buying pairs of birds for the offerings of zavim or zavot and of women who have given birth. Now the zav, zava, and a woman after childbirth, when she cannot afford the animal offering for the woman after childbirth, are required at the end of their purification process to bring a pair of birds as offerings. One bird is a chatat offering and the other an olah offering. The chataot, v'shamot, and the surplus of money set aside to buy animal chatat offerings and asham offerings. Now these offerings are required to atone for a person who has committed the types of sins listed in Sefer Vayikra chapters 4 and 5 and Zvachim chapter 5 Mishnah 5. Motrehen nedava. The surplus of money in all of these cases is placed in the temple chest marked voluntary communal offerings. Since a person may spend as much as he wants on these offerings, we assume that he intended to consecrate all the money set aside for them. The surplus money cannot be used to buy an additional chatat or asham, because these offerings may not be brought as a donation only to atone for a sin, and he already atoned for a sin with the chatat or asham he bought with the money he put aside. Rather, the extra money is placed in the one donation chest in the temple, whose funds are used to purchase voluntary olah offerings to be brought on the altar at times when there were few offerings to be brought. The Mishnah sums up these cases with a rule. This is the general rule. Any money that comes to pay for a chatat offering or an asham offering, motaran nedava, its surplus is placed in the temple chest marked voluntary communal offerings. This rule was derived from a pasuk by Yoyada the Kohen Gadol, as the Mishnah later on in chapter 6, Mishnah 6 will explain. Now, even though in one of the Mishnah's cases above, the money was set aside for a pair of birds, one of which is to be an olah offering, nevertheless, since the birds are brought together as a pair, even the money for the olah is the same law as the money for a chatat, and its surplus too goes to buy voluntary communal offerings. Now, until now, the Mishnah has discussed cases where the extra funds cannot be used for their originally designated purposes. Now the Mishnah lists cases where extra funds are used for the designated purpose. Motar olah leolah. The surplus of money set aside for an olah offering is used to buy another olah offering. Motar mincha lemincha. The surplus of money set aside for a flour offering is used to buy another flour offering. Motar shlamim leshlamim. The surplus of money set aside for a shlamim offering is used to buy another shlamim offering. Now, a nolah is a voluntary offering whose meat is completely burnt on the altar. A shlamim is a voluntary offering for which a small part is burnt on the altar, a small part is given to the kohanim, while the bulk of the meat is eaten by the owners. In all of these cases, the extra money can be used to buy additional offerings of the same kind because they are all voluntary offerings and a person may bring as many of them as he wishes. The Mishnah continues its list. Motar Pesach lishlamim, the surplus of money set aside for a Pesach offering, the offering brought by all Jews on the afternoon of Erev Pesach, is used to buy a shlamim offering. That money cannot be saved for next year's Pesach offering, but must instead be used for shlamim offerings. Again, this law is learned from a pasuk. In Sefer Dvarim, chapter 16, pasuk 2. Motar nizirim nizirim, the surplus of money collected to purchase offerings for poor nizirim is used to buy offerings for other poor nizirim. Now a nazir is someone who accepts upon himself a Nazirite vow. He is forbidden to drink wine or eat grape products, to cut his hair, or to become tameh through contact with a dead person. At the completion of his nizirut, the nazir brings 3 animal offerings, an olah, a chatat, and ishlamim, along with their nisachim, as well as 20 loaves of matzah. Again, the extra money collected to purchase offerings for poor nizirim is used to buy offerings for other poor nizirim, meaning the leftover money should be held until it's needed for other poor nizirim. Motar nazir nendava, but the surplus of money of an individual nazir who set aside money for his own offerings and has some money left over is placed in the temple chest marked voluntary communal offerings. Since the money was designated for a particular nazir, it cannot be used for other nazirim. Now the same would be true if the money had been set aside for a specific group of nazirim. Since it has been designated for them in particular, it cannot be used for other nazirim. Now the Mishnah's distinction is not between an individual and a group, but between a fund for specific nazirim and a general fund for whichever nazirim may need it. What remains from a general fund may be saved for future Nizirim. What remains from a fund for specific Nizirim may not be saved for other Nizirim, and therefore goes for voluntary communal offerings. Now, having discussed what's done with the extra money designated for various offerings, the Mishnah now turns to teaching what should be done with the extra money collected for various charitable purposes. Motar aniyim la'aniyim. The surplus of money collected for poor people in general is used for other poor people when the need arises. Motar ani le'ota ani. But the surplus of money collected for the sake of a specific poor person is given to that poor person. Now, charity money given for a specific purpose may not be used for a different purpose. Therefore, if charity collected for poor people in general was used to help them and there are leftover funds, the remainder should be held for other poor people in the future to be used when the need arises. But if it was collected for a specific poor man and used to help him, the extra money belongs to him and may not be given to another poor person. Even though he no longer needs the money, since at the time people donated money to this man, he was indeed poor, we assume that their intention was that all the money, even the extra, should go specifically to him. Motar shvuim lishvuim, the surplus of money collected for the redemption of captives in general is used for other captives when the need arises. Motar shavui leota shavui, but the surplus of money collected for the redemption of a specific captive is given to that captive. Now, regarding the charity case that we mentioned, the same law applies if charity is collected for a specific group of poor people. Any extra must go to them and not to other poor people. Now, the Mishnah concludes with a discussion of what should be done with the surplus funds collected for burying the dead. Motar metim lemetim. The surplus of money collected for the burial of the dead in general is used to bury other dead people too poor to afford their own burial. Like other forms of charity, money collected for burying poor people who die may not be used for a different purpose than what it was collected for. Motar hamed yorshav, the surplus of money collected to bury a specific dead person too poor to afford his own burial is given to their heirs. Now, the surplus money here obviously cannot be given to him. Since he's dead, we give it to his heirs. When charity is collected publicly for someone's burial, the deceased suffers a great disgrace. We can assume that he only forgave such a slight to his honor for the sake of his children or other heirs, and so the surplus money should go to them. Rabbi Meir says, Motar hamet yeh munachat shevo Eliyahu. the surplus of money collected for a dead person must be set aside until Eliyahu the prophet comes at the end of days and passes judgment on this undecided point of law. Now Eliyahu the prophet will be the herald of Mashiach, and he will resolve all the halachic questions that have remained undecided. Now Rav Meir is uncertain whether it can be assumed that the deceased forgoes his honor on behalf of his heirs. He therefore rules that no one may touch the surplus money until the issue is settled by Eliyahu HaNavi, Eliyahu the prophet. Rabbi Natan says, Motar hamet bonin lo nefesh al kivro. With the surplus of money collected for a dead person, they build a monument for him upon his grave. Now Rabbi Natan holds that the deceased certainly does not forgive his dishonor on behalf of his heirs. The surplus money must therefore go to honor him by building a monument or tombstone to perpetuate his memory, to remind people of his memory. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.